Welcome back to another episode of Listening In. Today, we're going to reap the benefits of thousands of phone calls, and we're going to talk about a wonder drug. I'm excited to share with you what exactly that wonder drug could be, and don't worry, it's not illegal, so don't worry about that. So I actually wanted to start today off with asking you a question. If you wanted to, how many of you could give me the exact number of steps that you've taken so far today? I would imagine most of us have that ability, right? Whether it's on our cell phones or on our watch or maybe a special band that we're wearing to help us count those. Now, how many of you, outside of the things I just mentioned, counted your steps manually? Grabbed a piece of paper and every step you took, just make that tick mark and count them all up at the end of the day to see how many steps you took. Probably none of us, right? None of us are counting our steps manually. I mean, or even if you're a super genius and you can just keep up with it in your head, I don't think we would waste that energy trying to count the number of steps. Now, what I did want to mention is this wonder drug that we're talking about. So the Harvard Medical School came out and said that walking could very well be a wonder drug. So think about that for a second. Why is not everybody counting the number of steps they take every day if walking is in fact a wonder drug? One of the beautiful things about technology is it's made the counting more accurate and it's more accessible to just about everybody, and it makes the results visible. So you can log into an app of sorts and see from day to day how you're doing with the number of steps that you're taking. And you might be thinking, well, that's well and dandy, but why are we talking about counting the number of steps that we take every day? So here's my question for you is there a wonder drug like walking when it comes to driver recruiting or just recruiting in general? What would that look like? What could that wonder drug be that, if the technology were there to make the things easily trackable, visible, could completely change the game? Because what they found when it comes to walking is that for those people who consistently check on it, that check their app, see how many steps they've taken, see how it compares to the previous day, that on average, those individuals will walk a mile more a day than those people who don't. So let's bring that back to driver recruiting, okay? So we asked drivers through Truckers News, one of our brands, when they're serious about looking into a job, what's their first step? What do you think the answer was? The number one answer given was they make a phone call. Now, some of these other things are catching up, like, hey, well, I go to their website, send an email or a text message. But the number one answer still is they place a phone call. So when we look at our data in the past 12 months, we've generated over 1 million unique phone calls for those folks that we work with. That is a lot of phone calls. And what we found is that represents roughly 46% of all the lead volume. So roughly, phone calls make up about half of all the leads coming in. So if you're in leadership when it comes to recruiting or a recruiter yourself, my question to you is, do you know what's happening on all of those phone calls? I mean, it represents half of all your lead volume. Do you know what's going on with those phone calls? And can you look at it at a glance? Now, my guess is no. that most of us can't look at it at just a glance, and we're not 100% sure what is going on with all of those phone calls. Even though the ability to commit a driver to working with you has the single biggest impact of any other step in the entire hiring process. So that phone call plays a bigger role in the hiring process than any other step. I know as a former director of driver recruiting, I would walk around the floor, talk to everyone, kind of listen in to see how those phone calls are going. And I'd feel pretty good about what I was hearing. But if you've listened to the show in the past, you know that its roots start in, we're going back and listening to these phone calls so we hear both sides, both the driver and the recruiter, to really understand and break down what is going on those phone calls. And it's pretty eye-opening when you start to listen and hear those conversations. It begins to uncover a lot of blind spots, problems that, or we'll call them opportunities, that we didn't even know were there or that we had. The beautiful thing about technology, just like when it comes to measuring steps and counting them and tracking it over time, looking at our performance, technology allows us to do the same thing with phone calls. So I'm just going to mention 4 blind spots, if you will, 4 ways that technology can uncover some of this data to help us find these opportunities to help even more individuals get connected with the right job. The first one then is industry averages. So these are looking at hundreds of thousands of phone calls, is 58% of calls are answered, meaning 42% of phone calls are missed. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, I'd imagine most of those missed phone calls happen after hours or over the weekends. But I can tell you, if you've got your advertising dialed in, that typically only represents changes at maybe 5%. So not a whole lot. So looking at the data, Mondays tend to be the day where most phone calls are missed. It's also the highest volume of phone calls, which makes sense coming in after the weekends, getting that large number of calls coming back in. What about the time of the day? Well, one group that we were working with, we found out that noon, they had the highest number of missed calls, which made sense. Most of the recruiters were going on lunch. So they simply staggered kind of the lunch breaks and were able to make big improvements to their answer rates. In general, across these hundreds of thousands of calls, 10 a.m. tends to be the time where the most phone calls are missed. All right, so point number 2 is we looked at 60,000 conversations that were with an eligible driver. So what does eligible mean? It means that there was nothing said in that call that made us think that they were not interested or not able to work with you. And when we broke that down, 45%, or almost half of those calls that were answered with an eligible driver, ended with no action being taken. So there was no application being discussed, taken over the phone, or even emailed. There was not a callback scheduled. So the call just kind of ended. And we all heard many of these phone calls where the driver says, hey, thanks for the information, I'll get back to you. And there's no clear understanding of who's doing what next. Roughly only 3% of all those answered eligible callers did we end up doing an application on the phone with them. So once again, just a quick example, one fleet that we know of challenged their recruiters to take 2 phone applications a day. Just that simple challenge. What they found is their call to hire ratio went from 40 to 1, meaning 40 phone calls to get 1 hire, dropped it down to 20 to 1. So they cut that lead to hire ratio or that call to hire ratio in half simply by doing more phone applications. Pretty impressive. One thing that we've seen a lot too is, recruiters get busy, whatever the case may be, but a large number of phone calls end up hitting voicemail. So when we break down those voicemails, only about half the drivers end up leaving a voicemail. So my question is, do we have a good process in place to follow back up with them? So we're probably decent, I would imagine, at following up with the ones that did leave a voicemail, but what about the ones that called in and decided to disconnect before they ever got to the voicemail? One fleet using this technology found that 54% of the time, drivers were getting to a voicemail box that was full. So that's expensive to have all these inbound phone calls coming in, hitting a voicemail box where they can't actually leave a message. Not a good experience for the drivers, and the fleet's missing out on some really good conversations potentially. One other one that I wanted to mention, and there's a lot, right? We can use this technology to match it up against what we've got in our ATS, for example, to see, hey, in our ATS, we're saying drivers are not interested because of pay. That's the biggest reason. But maybe by listening in on these phone calls, what we find out is it's not pay, it's home time, or the routes or the type of freight being hauled. The other one I wanted to just mention is what we found is about 1 in 15 calls that come in through advertising channels in general are from drivers already working with us. And it makes sense. They're probably just Googling something, clicking on the sponsored ad at the top to be able to speak with someone. So what one fleet did is during orientation with drivers, they made sure that everybody was putting into their cell phones the numbers that drivers would need to call most often, whether it's a driver manager or payroll, safety, the shop. Go ahead and get those numbers pre-entered into their phones. That way, they're not tying up your lines or using your advertising dollars to call in. So these are just some of the blind spots that can be uncovered when we use technology to listen in, not to 1 or 2 phone calls like we talk about on this show, but hundreds and thousands of phone calls to look for those trends, to look for those patterns that we often talk about, to begin to make real changes in areas that we might not know even problems existed in. So I'm excited about where technology is headed and how it can help us create a better candidate experience, create a better recruiter experience, and ultimately just make sure that we're having great conversations. So I hope you found that to be helpful. The whole idea here was to talk about this wonder drug in recruiting, which is the phone call. It represents half of your lead volume, and knowing what's going on with those phone calls makes a huge difference, or it can, if we're using technology to help us uncover what's going on so that those blind spots become areas of opportunity that we can address. Now, whether you're working with us or not, we've been pouring a lot of work into some technology that does just that. So if you've got questions, we'd love to answer those for you and show you how our call disposition report is uncovering blind spots for fleets across the country to be even more effective when it comes to making their hires. We'll talk to you later.